there. Thank you so much for watching, for listening, for joining me today. Super happy to have you here, and I'd love to have you subscribe to my channel. We have really great content. We have interviews, we have great teaching and jokes and all kinds of fun stuff. So we're starting a new series, and I'm really happy about this series, and it's related to lessons for starting. I don't know about you, but as we're coming to the end of this year, I always think about, New Year's Eve and starting a new year. And so what would be some lessons for starting? And I think it's important for us to look at that because I get that we're finishing up this year, but that's part of the lesson. And we're going to look at 3 people in the Bible for some keys and lessons to help us with starting well. But the first, and we're going to look at Jacob, we're going to look at Moses, and we're going to look at Jesus for our kind of key lessons. But I would propose to you for today, this episode, an important key lesson for starting, lessons for starting, is to finish well. Finish well. I think it's really important for us to think about this year as we finish this year, and what are some things we need to finish, conclude, wrap up, close down, or finish well, endings that we need to conclude. Before we move into a new beginning, it's good to finish up some things, to close them down, to conclude. And so when you think about it, look at Jacob. Jacob ended well. In his life, he's one of my favorite people in the Bible because he's very, very human. And you see a good span of his life from his birth, right? He's a twin with Esau. He's the second born, and he comes out holding Esau's heel. So he's, we call him a supplanter, whatever. And you see him over the course from his birth all the way to his death. And when you look at his death at the end of his life in Genesis 49, he ended well. And he ended in a really interesting scenario. He wasn't living in his homeland, the promised land that God had given to Abraham, his grandfather. At that point, he was living in Egypt because there had been a big famine. Jacob's family moved down there because Joseph, kind of remember some of that story. But when he's in Egypt at the end of his life, he chooses to bless all of his sons. He chooses to speak into their future. Now, some of the things he says could be a little bit, that's kind of makes you squeamish, because some of the things are seemingly harsh. And I think Jacob is acknowledging, look, this is what's in you, and you need to think about and deal with that, because there needs to be you need to have some internal recalibrating. But Jacob finishes well, and I love what he does. He blesses Pharaoh. He worships God. And then he tells his sons, don't bury me here. I want to be buried back in my homeland with my family. And he finishes and closes out his life and recognizes it is God who has provided, who has directed, who has protected, who has completely steered his life. And Jacob recognizes that. And remember, at one point, the pivot point in his life is when he wrestles with God in Genesis 32. And God renames him, gives him the name Israel, one who wrestles with God. I just think that's so powerful because Jacob was absolutely integrated and settled in with God over the course of his life. And I think it's very important for us as we finish up this year. Let's go back and think about bless the year, bless some of the things that have happened, bless God, bless some people, be grateful for some things, recognize some of the things that God has done for you, the blessings God has given you, and recognize that it is God who is steering, protecting, guiding, providing in your life, just like Jacob did. And, think about Moses. Moses, he also ended well. I think he's an incredible man. His life basically happened in 3 40s or 2 40s. He went and led 40 years in Pharaoh's house, 40 years in the wilderness herding sheep, and then the last 40 years herding Israelites, if you will. So 3 of those. At the end of his life, it said he walked with God, and God walked with him into the hills, and when he died, God buried him. And I think it's really powerful to consider that Moses, in many respects, had somewhat of a supernatural infancy, right? He was saved out of the Nile River by Pharaoh's daughter, grew up all the great things from living in Pharaoh's household, ran into the wilderness because he made a poor choice and killed an Egyptian slave master, had a very powerful supernatural experience with God at the burning bush that turned his life into the culmination of everything that was invested in him up to that point. And he lived that out in the last 40 years of his life. He led the Israelites out of slavery. He had Mount Sinai. He did the Red Sea. He got the 10 Commandments. He got the layout for the tabernacle. He led the Israelites in 40 years in the wilderness and trusted God all the way to the end. Made a few mistakes, no doubt about it, absolutely, but still walked with God. He ended well. And at the end of his life, God is the one that closed the chapter and literally buried him. They still don't technically know where Moses' tomb is. He ended well. And last but not least, I just proposed Jesus. Jesus, he ended well. He ended extremely well. His death on the cross was a very powerful culmination of an expression of love. One of the things he did on the cross is he forgave. He forgave. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. And I think part of ending well includes forgiveness. It includes walking with God, just like Moses did. It includes going back and finding God's blessings and acknowledging and continuing to bless. These are all important things to finishing up well. We can't start and have a good beginning if we haven't had a concluding, resolved finish. So that's my challenge for you this year. Let's finish well. Let's reflect on this year. Let's forgive. Let's bless. Let's keep walking with God. And let's finish well so that we can set up 2023 as a great start. So thank you for subscribing. Hit the notification bell right there. And then here's a question for you to answer. In this year, what is the best thing that has happened to you in this past year? You're like, well, something for you to think about. Leave that in the comments. It'll be super fun to kind of have some engagement there. And here's a joke for you. Every morning after I get out of the house, a bike comes out of nowhere and runs me over. It's a vicious cycle. I know, it's super stupid, but next week will be way better.